Leaders from more than 30 countries are set to convene in Washington, D.C. for the NATO summit this week as the alliance marks its 75th anniversary. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is set to meet with top congressional leaders to discuss his nation's path into the alliance. But according to Politico, much of the week's attention might turn to the looming U.S. presidential election. Joining us now, outgoing NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. NATO Secretary, thank you so much for being here.
I was going to say, it's just a real pleasure to welcome you and have you here at the table on the weekend. A busy week, as we were talking off air, for yourself and the president and the world leaders that are gathered here. How do you assess NATO at this point, as you mark this 75th year, as you begin to turn the corner into the next part of this century, given what we've seen play out in Europe with the recent elections there, including Labour taking the lead and a new prime minister in Britain, and of course our elections this November. How do you see the alliance right now, given some of the changes that are happening globally as well as domestically?
So NATO is the most successful alliance in history because we have been able to be together despite the fact that we are 32 different nations with different political parties, with different history, with different culture. But we've always been able to unite around our core task to protect and defend each other, to prevent war, to preserve peace. And now we live in a more dangerous world, a full-fledged war in Europe, a new war in the Middle East, and we see the rise of China posing a challenge to our security. So that just makes NATO even more important. And the good news is that we are able to make big decisions together. For instance, this week we'll have new decisions on defense spending. We have now a record high number of European allies spending more than 2% of GDP on defense. When we agreed to increase defense spending 10 years ago, only 3 allies met that guideline. So we demonstrate that it's not only US, but actually a collective effort of the whole alliance that it's about protecting each other.
Oh, very good.
You know, Mr. Secretary General, I think about Zelensky, President Zelensky of Ukraine, who will be here to huddle with a number of different folks, but he is notably going to have a meeting on Capitol Hill. And he said this on Bloomberg television Friday, and I'm just going to read it. He said, quote, "They can't plan my life and the life of our people and our children," said President Zelensky. "We want to understand whether in November we will have the powerful support of the U.S. or will be alone." There's lots of reporting that notes that during President Zelensky's visit, that is a question he is seeking to answer. Is that a question that you or members of the NATO alliance have? Will the United States, after November 5th, depending on, if President Biden is not reelected, are you concerned that you will not have the support you need in these various fronts, because it is Ukraine, it is also what is happening in between Israel and Hamas. I mean, there is a level of uncertainty in the world right now, and the alliance needs to remain strong.
But in democracies, you never have guarantees, because it's for the voters to decide, and there will always be different political parties that will be in government in the different allied countries. But I expect that the United States will remain a strong and staunch NATO ally, and that the United States will continue to provide support to Ukraine, because that is in the security interest of the United States. If President Putin wins in Ukraine, it is not only a tragedy for the Ukrainians, and it will not only embolden President Putin, it will also embolden President Xi. And we have to see that China, North Korea, Iran, they are supporting Russia because they want NATO and the US to fail in Ukraine. So our support to Ukraine is not about charity, it's about our own security interest, and therefore I expect the US to continue to provide support to Ukraine.
Staying on the topic of Ukraine, one of the ideas that has been floated by the right, specifically by Donald Trump, as a land for peace deal. You have ruled out a land for peace deal predicated on the fact that this has been tried before. It has not worked. Can you talk us through the lessons that have been learned and why you do not believe that is the best path forward?
First and foremost, It is for the Ukrainians to decide what are acceptable conditions for negotiations and what will be acceptable conditions for any negotiated solution. Second, the easiest way to end this war is for President Putin, who started the war, to stop attacking a neighbor, to stop attacking Ukraine. Then, of course, the quickest way to end the war is to lose a war. But that will not bring peace. That will bring occupation of Ukraine. So what we need to ensure is that President Putin realizes that he cannot win on the battlefield, that he cannot achieve his aim of controlling Ukraine by military force. And the only way to get there is to provide military support to Ukraine. So President Putin has to sit down and agree a solution for Ukraine, where Ukraine prevails as a sovereign, independent nation. And again, to lose, to bow, to capitulate for Putin, that will increase the risk for more war, for more aggressive actions by both Russia but also by China. As the Japanese Prime Minister said recently, what happens in Ukraine today can happen in Asia tomorrow. So if you're concerned about Taiwan, South China Sea, then follow what happens in Ukraine and support Ukraine.
Mr. Secretary General, there was a little debate here in the U.S. Last Thursday that caused quite a stir and has continued to do so. And there's some reporting out in the last couple of days as the NATO alliance comes to Washington that members of NATO and other leaders around the globe are concerned about President Biden. I want to gauge the concern in NATO about a re-emerging President Donald Trump. What they see 2025, 26, 27 looking like for the alliance, given what we already know, former President Trump demanded of NATO and thinks of NATO. What concerns does NATO have looking ahead if Trump reemerges as president?
So I worked as Secretary General for 4 years when President Trump was, former President Trump was President of the United States. I now worked for 3.5 years with President Biden. And it is always important for me to not be part of partisan political domestic discussions inside any NATO ally, the United States or any other NATO ally. But the reality is that on some of the main issues, for instance, the need for European allies to spend more, to have fairer burden sharing within the alliance, that has been a constant message from consecutive US presidents for many years. And they all have a point. And the good news is that this is now really changing. Allies are stepping up, investing more, both when it comes to defense budgets. 23 allies spending 2%, record high. But also the fact that when it comes to Ukraine, more than half of the support to Ukraine comes from European allies and Canada. So this demonstrates burden sharing. So the main message from both former President Trump and from President Biden and from President Obama has now been addressed. And therefore, that just underlines my confidence that the United States will remain a staunch ally.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.